Hi guys, it's John here with another inbox review. Today we're looking at the World War One Mark 1 Airfix female tank. Interesting image here because there's not an awful lot of images available of the female Mark 1 tank. Plenty of the Mark 4, but not many of the Mark 1. And I'll go into the differences between the Mark 1 and later variants in a few minutes when I do the actual review itself. We'll just take this picture off and go into the boxing history like I normally do. The boxing history, we're looking first at the Airfix Mark 1. I'll just drop this picture down a little so you can see it entirely. But basically, the Airfix female Mark 1 tank actually originated, and it has all of its origins from the Airfix Series 1 World War One tank. But when this particular kit was issued back in 1967, it was actually issued in a bag kit prior to this. This was a 1970s issue, but the kit was actually released with no definition between the male and the female tanks, and I don't really think Airfix looked into the differences between the two tanks that were actually designed. But we'll go into the differences between the male and the female tank, but this particular model is actually of the male tank and not the female tank. But the female tank, which is this release, was released in 2009, and there is very little boxing history to go on because this is the only released box that is available of the female tank. So this is the first and only release. It was released in 2009, and as you can see, it's a Series 2 kit, and there is a reason for that, and I'll explain in a minute. We'll just come away and show you an image there. This is the only image I can find, decent image I can find, of a female Mark 1 British World War One tank. Interestingly, it has a lot of the appendage on the top of the tank there. I don't really understand what all that stuff is for, but there were different adaptations applied to the top of a lot of Mark 1 males and female tanks for use in theatre in the Western Front. And what I want to quickly do now is just bring your attention to the tabletop so that I can actually just clip this in place, so I can actually show you the kit in question. I just want to, I think that's better, there we go, that's better. So I can show you the kit in question, but basically this is the model in question. It's a Series 2 kit. The actual model number there is 02337. That's the serial number on the model. And this, as I said, is the only boxing release of this kit that's available. We'll just open the box up like normal, and we'll go through the inbox review like I normally do. First of all, instructions. The instructions are quite large for this kit for a small model. The typical Airfix instructions. They look like a photocopy. On the front page you've got gumph on the history of the tank itself. It's in 5 different languages, which is nice, as always. And you've got the model designation at the top there and the serial number of the kit. When you open onto page 2, and like normal with a lot of Airfix modern generation release kits, you've got some assembly instructions here, and it's in lots and lots of different languages. And you've also got some pointer keys here, which tell you, what you have to do with certain parts, and their recommendations as to how to build it. A lot of these keys aren't used in this kit, but again, a lot of them are. Then you've got the actual assembly instructions. And the first thing I noticed when I looked at this instruction sheet is that there is a massive block of numbers missing in the parts. Now there's a reason for that. The female World War One tank is actually based on the World War One male tank release that was released in Series 1. And believe it or not, all the parts are still available in this box to build the male tank if you really want to. but there's an extra sprue included in the kit to build the female model. And that's why this kit is Series 2 and not Series 1. The male kit is still Series 1, the female kit is Series 2, and it's purely because what they've done is they've built the Mark 1 male tank, but they've just put this extra sprue in to allow you to build the Mark 1 female sponsons. And I'll explain exactly what all that involves after I've gone through the assembly instructions, the decals and the parts. It'll all become apparent by the end of the video. Basically, Airfix have got you building this kit in, again, quite a large number of steps. 12 in all. There are 12 steps in all. Step 1, interestingly enough, is to build the female sponsons. And the sponsons that go on the side of the tank, in the real tank, they could actually be brought in slightly to allow the tank to be transported by rail. If you didn't bring the sponsons in, the damn tank wouldn't fit through the tunnels. But basically, yeah, you could bring the sponsons in for transportation. But basically the sponsons, they fit on the side of the tank, as you can see in the picture here. And the female tank had 2 machine guns either side, and the male tank had one massive naval cannon fitted into the forward section of the sponson on the male tank, but the female one had 2 machine guns either side, so it was armed with 4 Vickers machine guns. And you basically fit the sponsons together in section 1 and section 3, and in section 2 and 4 you apply what I call the bearings at the back that hold the guns in place and allow them to rotate. Then in section 5 and 6 you put the tank's main I would call track and side panniers together. These don't form the main bulk of the tank, but they certainly form a major part of the tank. These are the parts, the rhomboid shaped parts that the tracks rotate around. And then in sections 7 and 8 you basically just marry the various sponsons to the various side panniers. Then in section 9 you build the body shell of the tank. It's it's a simple build. The kit goes together. I mean, I have built the male tank version of this kit a while back, and it does go together quite easily, but there is a major issue which I'll explain soon. But basically in section 9 you put the body of the tank together, and then you attach the port track pannier onto the side of the tank, and then section 10 and 11 you build the suspension attachment point and the steering mechanism, and again I'll talk about this soon as well. And then in section 12 you basically just marry up the rest of the parts together and then apply the tracks to the side panniers. Now the tracks, I do remember when I built the male tank, the tracks are too short, and although they're telling you to apply a heated knife, when you actually put the tracks onto the panniers they don't meet together. Now I don't know whether they've addressed this issue with this release of the kit by providing different tracks, I'm not sure, but when I built that male tank they were short by about ½ an inch. There was no way they were going to stretch. So I had to put a filler into the tank underneath the pannier, so that when the tank sat on its tracks you couldn't really see it anyway. On the back page you've got a paint guide, which is quite nice, and again I'll talk about the paint guide after we've gone through the parts, but basically it gives you a nice camo pattern for the tank, which is clearly labelled out in 4 different colours, and the tracks are basically gunmetal, which again I'll talk about in a minute, because there are lots of things a lot of people should know if they want to build a diorama of any World War I tank, so that they can have more information on what they actually want to build and what period and everything. The other thing that's interesting is the transfer sheet is tiny. If I can get it out of the box. It's so small it doesn't want to come out of the box. And I'm not sure if you can see an awful lot on that transfer sheet, but basically 3 or 4 white transfers with some sort of insignia on. I can't even read it. It'll probably become apparent when you put them on the tank. But they're very small indeed. But they do look quite good quality. And again, they're not that raised off the backing paper, which is nice. So yeah, that's the decals and instructions. I'll quickly go through the parts. And this is where I'm going to start talking to you about, yeah. I'll take the parts out of the box. Yeah, those tracks look very similar to the ones I had in the Series 1 male tank, so yeah, that's interesting. Here's the tracks basically, and that's the female sprue. We'll go through that in a minute. Here's the tracks. It's a basic old original idea for the Airfix tracks. Rubberized plastic, and you stretch it around the panniers and marry that to that. Heated knife, away you go. Not sure how long they're going to be, but they look pretty similar to the ones I used to have on the Mark 1 male. So that'll be interesting to see how they go together. Now then, these parts here all relate to the male tank, the Series 1 kit. And basically, there's your male sponsons, which don't fit in the female tank whatsoever. You've got your rhomboid shaped side panniers for the tank itself, and that's the top panel for the body shell. The bottom panel, that's the belly of the tank, is that part there. Now, what's quite interesting, if I can get this into focus, is that this tank, of course, was one of the first designed, well, it was the first designed tank in the world, and it was riveted together. I'm not sure whether it was actually riveted or bolted together. It could have been bolted, and it's not going to come into view very well. It's a shame. But the actual fixing points are clearly moulded in this panel, and they're quite large, so I'm guessing it might actually have even been bolted together rather than riveted. But the tank was made out of cast steel, and its armour was ready to stop bullets going through rather than shells or anything else. There are lots of parts on this sprue that don't apply to the female tank, but the majority of them do. The majority of what's on here does. And all these parts are relatively flash free, and that's quite incredible when you think the kit was originally released in 1967 in a bag Type 2 header. I'm quite impressed with that. That's quite good. Parts are quite clearly defined, and they're quite nice, which is nice. Here's the second sprue from the original World War I male tank. There's the steering mechanism at the back. The wheels seem to be quite clearly defined and nicely moulded. All these parts here which go onto the body and the top of the tank, they're all nicely moulded. Nice detail on them actually. I'm quite impressed with the detail that goes in this tank. And there doesn't appear to be a lot of flash there, does there? There's no burrs, no moulding, no issues whatsoever. And on the back you've got the injection mouldings where you won't see them when the tank's been put together, which was a lot of forethought for an Airfix kit from 1967. Very impressed. And these panniers are exactly the same panniers that you get in the male tank from World War I, even if you bought an old edition, which I did. I think mine was an early box edition from the late 70s. And they're nicely moulded as well. I like the detail that you've got on them. Let's stop that shaking around, let the camera train. There you go. Quite nice mouldings, and I'm pretty sure it was bolted together, this kit. Now then, this is the sprue that you get for the female tank, and the sponsons, if I show you the difference between the sponsons, you can see exactly what the score is. These are the female sponsons, and these had two Vickers machine guns attached to them. And there's the male sponsons, and they had one, I think it was a 37mm naval gun sticking out the front. There's the guns there. Now the machine guns are here. There's two of them, and there's the other two. And the firepower in those is obviously going to be a lot less than the marine guns that go in the male, but these were applied to the Western Front to knock out military personnel running across no man's land. and to cut through enemy lines. That's what the tank was designed for. There's access panel doors on here, which are quite nice. They're actually available to be in the open or closed position, which, you know, it's a nice touch. I like the fact that Airfix have tried to do something with this kit to make it slightly different than the old original issue. And the sponsons for the female tanks, the detail on them is it's about the same as the male one. It's, you know, not too much detail on there, which is quite nice. You know, it marries up, which is quite nice. So basically, if you wanted to, you could build the male or the female tank out of this kit. It's not really a problem. So that's the parts. The parts are quite nicely moulded, even though some of the mouldings on them are quite old. They're not bad. Not bad at all. Now then, what I want to quickly do is just go through some of the gumph, but there is some additional information which I'd like you to know. The kit we're reviewing today is the Airfix World War I female Mark I tank. Its serial number is A02337 and it's built in 1/76 scale in Series 2. Now, I do want to draw your attention to a YouTube channel which is being run by a member of the Bovington Tank Museum on YouTube. The guy's name is David Fletcher and he was, I believe, one of the curators at the Bovington Tank Museum. But I do believe that he's taken a much more second-rate seat now because he isn't very young in years. But he is incredibly knowledgeable, and this man, if he doesn't know something about a tank, it's not worth bothering trying to find out about it. Basically, the guy's name is David Fletcher, and he does what's called a range of tank chats on YouTube. And if you just put in David Fletcher's tank chats from the Bovington Tank Museum into YouTube search engine, you should get a list of his tank chats, and his tank chats on the Mark I tank, the Mark IV tank and the Mark V tank are very, very interesting indeed. But the information that he gives about the Mark I is quite useful to a lot of people who are doing dioramas because it explains an awful lot of the differences and a lot of the things that people should really understand. For a start, the male tank utilised 2 ex-naval guns and sponsons, one each side of the tank. The female tank housed 4 Vickers machine guns, 2 either side, in modified sponsons. The steering system at the back, that's the twin wheels with the trellis that sticks onto the back of the tank, was only used on the Mark I as it was found to not work very well, and so they didn't really bother utilising it on the Mark III or the Mark IV. The colour scheme used was the camo pattern on the box, but as the tanks began to be used operationally, they just finished them off in brown paint because the tanks very quickly ended up caked in mud and the tanks just looked brown anyway. So the army just painted them in matte brown colours. Especially, I mean, probably not so much in tanks that were in service during the Somme, which was the first operational sortie that the tanks were used in, but certainly after that, the British Army tended to just paint them brown. Now, there are decals for one version, which is Her Majesty's Landship, We're All In It, of A Company Heavy Section Machine Gun Corps during the Battle of the Somme in November 1916. And the tank does comprise 67 parts on 3 grey plastic sprues and 2 tracks totalling 69 parts. The dimensions of the kit are approximately 5 inches long by 1.5 inches wide by 1.5 inches high. Now then, the options and costs are quite limited. So I'll be honest with you, they're very limited. In 1/76 scale, you have the Airfix Mark I male tank and the Airfix Mark I female tank. The Mark I male tank retails for about £8, £7.99 usually, and the female tank usually retails for between £9.99 and £10.99. The 72nd scale option, there's an option from MB Models of the Mark I female tank, and this kit retails for about £15. And in 1/35th scale, there's an option by a company called Take On Models, and they build a Mark I female tank that retails for around about 30 quid. Conclusions. Overall, about the contents of the box. Interestingly, all the parts are here to build the male tank as well as the female tank. Now, I don't know why Airfix didn't just call the boxing of this tank the World War I Mark I tank, but they produce two separate kits now, one in Series 1 and one in Series 2. It would make more sense to just build a Mark 1 tank and just have options available for the female and the male parts, but they haven't done that, which is interesting. The parts are just as I remember when I built the male tank 2 to 3 years ago. A bit of a pig in parts of the build, but the tracks are also too short and you'll need a filler underneath the tank to fill the gap. The cheaper option, the Airfix kit is a cheaper option than the others, and it's still not many options out there to choose from, but the MB kit does look really much more fresher in its mouldings. Also, it includes PE for the meshing on the top of the tank's framing. The other thing is, the 35th scale tank is an extremely accurate, nicely built model. The first image on this video that you saw was actually of the Taken 35th scale model tank. I am still looking forward to this build, to see the difference between the two types of tanks and to see how Airfix have, or if at all Airfix have dealt with the issue with the tracks. It would be quite interesting. So that's the inbox review on the female Mark 1 tank from Airfix. I hope this video has been of some use. If you like what you see, give me a like. If you like what you've seen after checking out some of my other videos, give me a subscription, and any comments, I'll be quite happy to try and answer any questions or reply to any comments that require a reply to. So I'll see you again for the next one, lads. Happy modelling, and let's get having some fun. Bye bye for now.